Hi, everybody. My name is Nikolai Secchi. I'm an account manager here at Jamf, covering our federal accounts. I'm the room host here today. I'd like to welcome you to our WWE cage match session. If you could all take a moment to put your singlets on, they'll be wheeling in the folding chairs and ladders in a few moments here. Just kidding. We're actually, compliant Mac workflows in the cloud, AWS and Jamf show you how. I'd like to introduce our two speakers today, Dave Sheardier. And I'm sorry, my phone keeps pushing my screens on me. Solutions Architect, EC2 Mac at Amazon, and Marcus Ransom, Senior Sales Engineer at Jamf. Guys, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Awesome. Thanks, everybody, and really appreciate folks coming out to JNUC as always.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to talking to you about your cloud Macs and what we can do to make them more compliant and more secure. So, loving this opportunity to get up here with Dave and show how using the power of both of our tools we can achieve some pretty awesome things with some of your more sophisticated devices. So we're going to break this down by talking about what actually is a cloud Mac. And why they're different from your other machines you may have in your organization, and then talk about what compliance actually looks like in the cloud, why we need to approach this differently, and then how do we bring all of these concepts back together. So, we might start this, given that, you're from AWS and these are your machines. So Dave, why don't you explain to us what a cloud Mac actually is?
Absolutely. So cloud Mac is, I like to start rather than, we'll get to the what, but the why kind of takes a little bit of a headline. If we take a look, and if anyone is a developer in the audience or listening, the Apple app development lifecycle. This is something where if you're writing an app for the App Store, you can design code and develop that app on anything. If you need to build, test, sign, publish, get that app ready for the App Store, that is something that requires macOS. It requires Xcode, and opens the door basically to all of these, all of the kind of app stores, the respective spots that your app can get to with the millions of developers and billions of devices. So with the sort of why did we build a Mac in the cloud, this is a Mac in the cloud. And this image, I always say this is my favorite image because of course it's very nerdy, but it also kind of lets me explain what are we looking at here. Obviously, there's one piece of this that's kind of obvious, which is there's a Mac Mini in there. We'll go into exactly which ones that we do rack in our data centers. But the whole other bunch of stuff that's connected to that is a little bit more. The green card that you see on the left side there is what's called AWS Nitro. And this allows for, over Thunderbolt, storage and networking. So you have the ability with these to really have this be a part of the rest of your AWS environment. It's an EC2 instance just like any other, so it can live on that network. And there is also a robot finger in the black box over there, because when a firmware update needs to happen, sometimes it's been most reliable to poke. So, yeah,
press the button, and pressing the button on something that you can't get access to is sometimes a little hard.
Yeah. So
it's wonderful you've solved that problem. Those of us with Mac Minis in data centers or in other rooms will probably appreciate that.
Yeah. For all of us that have had to go in middle of the night reset something, it's nice to just go, okay, we have something to take care of that for us and easily can get back. So this is our current lineup of EC2 Mac instances. We started with the Mac 1 instance, which is an x86. The next was a Mac 2. Apple doesn't usually let folks know about what the names of their processors are going to be in advance, so it got a little confusing. Mac 2 M1, Mac 2 M2, and Mac 2 M2 Pro are both the M2 and M2 Pro Mac Minis. We also have a Mac Studio with 128 gigabytes of RAM, and very new recently, the M4s, which are a Mac-M4 and Mac-M4 Pro, with also additional RAM.
So let's quickly talk about the partnerships that Jamf and AWS have that are the sort of things we've worked together that can help make your life a lot easier and build out these workloads. So this started at JNUC in 2022. So David Brown, who was your VP at that stage of Amazon EC2, came onto our keynote, was talking about how Jamf was the first organisation that could integrate enrollment for these EC2 Macs in the cloud into your workflows. And so that was a really awesome moment to show what you could do with our products together. And then we've also got integrations for AWS verified access. So that's AWS tooling that can make sure that only the right staff are able to access these machines based on the compliance of their devices. So use cases. You sort of mentioned the use case of software lifecycle. So what are some of the requirements that we have? We can see there's a lot of things that you might want to have on these machines other than Xcode. And people are using these devices for more than just the notarization and uploading to the App Store. So, we see people using them for Xcode, CI/CD. We spoke in the keynote about the automations that we're bringing into the Jamf platform and being able to leverage Macs in the cloud to be able to build out and manage some of those automations. But we also see people using them for testing, being able to test workflows and not rely on hardware or everyone having hardware, being able to have multiple operating systems, things like that. But then there's also VM hosts. We see people wanting to use these to have multiple VM hosts. So really it kind of just comes down to it's a Mac that's just somewhere else.
Yeah.
And that somewhere else is that picture you showed us.
Yeah. I'll point out too, you mentioned VM host, and this is something that is just as a point of clarification, an EC2 Mac instance out of the box is not a virtual Mac. It is an actual Mac that basically has its startup drive coming over Thunderbolt. So you're still actually you're responsible for the startup disk itself, but otherwise you are able to virtualize on top of an EC2 Mac instance.
Yeah. And that's really important to understand with some of the limitations of virtual Macs as well with your testing workflows, and that's where something like this can be really useful. Like we all have the ability to spin up virtual machines for all sorts of things, on even our standard workstation. But the ability to be able to do that on bare metal in one of these machines is really awesome. So why don't we look at some of these use cases that we're going to use to sort of define these sort of ideas of compliance. So, the first one we're going to use is a build server. And this is something we see a lot of people using them for. So what are some of the things that we need to think about with a build server that are going to be sort of the requirements and what it's going to do?
Yeah. So one thing that definitely has been I'd say one of the most common things I've heard is we have a development team. They've got they have a Mac Mini that they're building their software on, and that Mac Mini is under somebody's desk, and there might be a question mark about that of exactly where it is. So the idea when you're building apps, there are some sensitive components when it comes to that. When it comes to signing, you do want to be able to ensure that not necessarily everything is going to be kind of touching that certificate. So being able to use not only the Mac as an Xcode signing machine, but also as sort of central repository for CI/CD as that happens. For artists, they're going to have assets that are getting changed in the background. So yeah, if you made a code change, you could actually check that and test against everything else. So
some of the things we see with these build servers, they'll, as well as Xcode, they may be running software like BuildKite that is being used to manage that, but predominantly they're SSH access only. People tend not to be logging into the GUI on these machines. They're going to be SSHing in, but they're also regularly reprovisioned. It's not a device that you leave running all of the time. You're going to be shutting it down, starting fresh, building again, reprovisioning, rinse and repeat. And so this kind of use case is going to be very different to maybe another one where it's a machine that you're using for testing, whether it's for UAT on applications, whether it's testing builds. You might be using it for packaging. You may be investigating packages and manipulating them for security, end-to-end workflows. And so this is the sort of thing where we'll see people logging into the GUI. They may be having some restrictions or workflows around that login. It may be something like Platform Single Sign-On or Jamf Connect. They may be admin elevation, they may be running as a standard user, all of those sorts of things. So we can see that there can be, just with these two use cases, there can be very different ways that people use these machines. And so this is something that you need to be aware of when you're structuring your compliance framework around it. So let's have a look at how these Macs in the cloud are different from how you may be doing this with, for example, a Mac Mini that was sitting under someone's desk, or your test machine that you may just pull out of the cupboard and start using, or a virtual machine. So what sort of things do we need to look at that are different on these machines, Dave?
So my favorite thing is not too much. These are still Macs running macOS, and and then you can do things just like you would have a Mac in front of you, things like Type 2 virtualization. But we do have this, since these are a bit different of a, hardware-wise, the workflow for things like enrollment is going to be a little different.
Yeah, and so the idea is like, what is the cloud? It's just someone else's computer. So that's really important here. Automated device enrollment, and the device being in Apple Business Manager, Apple School Manager, needs to be your computer. And this is not your computer, it's Dave's computer, AWS's computer.
I have too many Mac.
Yeah. So thinking about how you're going to enroll these devices, and we can show you some really awesome tooling that we've got for that there, but it's user-initiated enrollment and agent enrollment, but you can also do account-driven device enrollment on these machines. So that's something that you've got to factor into your workflows, but also your compliance. So what other things are different about these machines?
This is, I'd say, the one that got me when I first started. When it comes to reprovisioning, big word, imaging. Really.
Yeah. Remember when we were told that imaging was dead and we didn't need to worry about imaging? Turns out all of that trauma that we had from imaging over the years is actually useful to know this. So the test machine, the build machine, being able to reprovision them quickly, test different operating systems, are things that we can do with this provisioning. So what are some of the tools that you've got that we can use here that we also need to factor in?
So when it comes to reprovisioning, you can start out basically as a standard, what's called an AMI, or an Amazon Machine Image, and this is basically the base system along with a few things that folks developing usually are going to be using, like Homebrew for example. And this is stuff that can be launched up through 1-2 command line arguments. But yeah, as you said, being able to choose the OS version, being able to say this is something that's frozen in time. It very much, as Mac admins, this may not be the first thought of, okay, this is where most of our users are going. But when it comes to the folks that are building software, having that assurance that the environment is where and when you need it to be.
And you can pick and choose which of those applications you want to have baked into that base image, and which ones you want to deploy with your build workflow, being able to very quickly flick backwards and forwards between different operating systems to validate how things work. So another thing that we need to focus on as well is that it's not a machine that's on our network or sitting next to us. It's not a machine we can look at the screen. So how do we need to think about access of these devices? What different ways do we see people accessing these devices?
So as you said earlier, SSH is basically the out-of-the-box experience, where when you spin up an EC2 Mac instance, you'll have an SSH key, or you can generate an SSH key and hold on to it, because that's the only time you will get it. And that would allow you to basically go over port 22. You can talk to that Mac. A few command line flags later, you would have VNC access. Keep in mind also, we were talking about networking too. There are ports that need to be opened for this, but this is also on that Amazon Virtual Private Cloud, that VPC. So this is on kind of that same network in general that if your folks are working with other pieces of AWS, they're also really contending with it.
And for accessing it over the GUI, there's a lot of tools you can use aside from things like VNC. So what are some of the third-party integrations you see people using for accessing these machines?
So the biggest one or first one that I'd seen, I'd say would be HP Anywhere. It was a product formerly known as Teradici. And the idea behind this, and this is probably going to sound familiar for if you've used Parsec as well, which is another one that works. The idea of encrypted, compressed, color-accurate video and audio that's coming over the wire rather than sort of, okay, we're going to draw this to the best of VNC's capabilities.
But using those tools is something you also need to factor into your compliance. When you're handing out somebody a workstation, there's often not a lot of compliance between the screen on the device and the person that's using it, whereas that is now something you need to factor in. So with the build servers, I guess it's primarily SSH, but with the other machines it sort of falls into that it depends category, that it's really going to depend on the use case and what your tool stack is in your organization. Yeah. So this is the one we touched on before with enrollment, so device management. So there are some things that we really need to factor in here when we're looking at how we're going to be managing these devices. So what are the challenges we need to overcome there?
So it is, again, I'm going to use the imaging word again. It gets thrown around a lot. That is, there is a very small setup process to the image that does need to be done for automated enrollment. Basically that, along with creating an API account that's able to create computer invitations. Yeah. Those are kind of the important things on the Jamf side. Also exclusions for a few specific things, and it's going to sound like a bit of heresy, but FileVault. And the reason being, we're not working with an internal drive. That internal drive is basically just there to do what it needs to do, and otherwise your boot drive is that elastic block store. Yeah. So,
and FileVault really being for securing data at rest. I'm guessing your data centers have some very sophisticated security that will address those issues and any concerns people have about data at rest on these devices as well.
Yeah. When it comes to EBS encryption, this is actually even outside of a running machine. It is actually at rest AES 256 encrypted for the entire data. So that's all of, rather than kind of the 128 that FileVault usually operates at.
And so the things that we need to factor in when we're not doing automated device enrollment, it is technically a user-approved enrollment, which someone is going to need to click a button. And so we'll go through that a little bit later about how you overcome that, but understanding that these are some of the things that are involved. Why are we going to enroll these in device management? Well, system extensions. If you need system extensions on these devices, if it's not enrolled, that's going to be a problem.
I'll also call out just one thing about system extensions too, because AWS also does have a system extension for their Elastic Network Adapter. That is quite important to receiving connectivity. So if you are setting this up and have a system extensions payload, we've got on the repo that we'll be showing at the end of this what our developer ID and the ID of the extension is to allow list that.
So there are some things we need to be aware of about how we use these machines as well. So we mentioned before with virtual machines, but why don't you talk through some of the things that need to be factored into the way this service has been built?
So I think I see a lot of faces from my book club here. So we've all read the macOS software license agreement, right? So yeah, there are some pieces that I do want to make sure that folks are aware of, especially the first being 24-hour minimum. This is called out as a 24-hour minimum lease time. So the idea is, if you were to get a Mac from AWS, which you can do in basically 2 lines of code, you would have to hold on to that for the first 24 hours of that. After that, billing, as with any other EC2 instance, is by the second. So you can let go of it from there. You'd be able to stop billing, and everything will be fine.
And there's also language around virtual machines in that EULA as well. So what does that tell us?
Yes. Well, I think if for the older among us, the virtual machine limit is a maximum of 2 VMs, and it is enforced now, which x86 days may have been. There may have been trust.
And then permitted developer services.
Yeah, because there is a Cloud Mac can be the right Mac for a lot of things, but a Cloud Mac isn't the right Mac for everything. When you're working with like folks that need like a primary workstation, that this is just, okay, I'm really doing more information work, it may not make sense to have them get an AWS Mac in the cloud. For things like graphics, again, looking through that software license agreement, there are pieces that you just want to make sure that you're aware of as you're deploying something like this.
And someone's primary workstation as well. You then need to factor in what they're going to be accessing that workstation from in terms of your security posture and also the end user experience as well, and identifying if this is actually going to provide the benefits and the service that you require.
We're Mac folks, we're picky.
Yeah, exactly. So let's have a look at compliance in the cloud. So why are we doing this? Why do we need to not just set these up, but actually look at compliance? So why is it that the devs have actually got this on a Mac Mini in the broom cupboard rather than talking to EUC or security or infrastructure about this? So a lot of the time it was because the compliance and security that was then going to be applied to these machines then prevented them from doing what they needed to do, because the compliance and security was applied as if it was a server or as if it was an end user machine. And we've seen with all of the things that are different, that's not going to be the case. So it's not just about having oversight and control over the machines. It's in the asset registry, it's got our security applied, and we can see what people are doing. It's also to be able to prove that these devices are doing what the owner said that it was going to do. So we get approval for this because it's going to be our build server for our app. But we've all been in situations where we've seen that maybe it then also becomes a Plex server, or we're using this for streaming music that we're having in the office because it's over there and it doesn't have any of these security controls. But it's also probably not being used for any of that. So how do we actually know what's happening on this machine? And then give security and governance the confidence that they don't need to have investigations into these machines. But it's also about making sure that these devices haven't been compromised. So if this is the build pipeline for your public-facing application, there's some very important things going on that machine. There's all of the certificates that you use for your developer access. But if someone was able to inject code into that machine by compromising it, that could be catastrophic for your organization. So this is why it's important to trust what people are using on these machines, but also verify that that is what's happening. We don't want the blanket trust going, these are professionals, we trust them to do the right thing. How do we give the organization confidence that this is what's happening? So these devices are going to have privileges to be able to do things that your standard end user machines are not going to have. But just setting those controls on the device isn't always going to be the right solution. We've applied these controls to the device, so it's okay. Well, we're using lots of different versions of the operating system on here. How do we make sure that the way those controls are being applied on the device are actually doing what they say that they're doing? And how do we make sure that someone hasn't come up with a different use case for this machine and now you need additional controls on there? At Jamf, we like to talk about these zero trust frameworks in the context of only authorized users on enrolled devices that are secure and compliant have got access to this sensitive data. And this is how we like to approach everything that we're doing in our organization. So this is why we need to enroll a device so we can have the control over it. And then we can see who's using the device, what the security of that device is, and then evaluate how we are securing it, how we're resecuring it, and that continued evaluation, making sure that there are no unwanted configurations or use cases, and there's no threats on the device. Making sure we know who is actually using the device. Okay, we're SSHing into it, but what key is being used for that SSH access? Who's got that key? Are they still employed in this company? Is the network secured so you can have to jump through other levels of trust before you can get access to this machine? And then what does that machine need to access? If it's got a very specific purpose, you can create a lot more confidence in that device by only giving it the access that it has. The concept of least privileged access is not just about what you can do on the device, but what you can do from that device. And so tools we can use to help us understand how we should be doing this. So Cyber Essentials has got a really great section on securing development and deployment guidance, and it says, do you trust the devices on which code is being written? And that's just not the developers' workstations that they're writing the code on, but this is also your CI/CD machines. You know, it's only running the code we say that it's running. Are you sure? You know, can you prove that this is what's happening? And being able to prove that and give you that confidence means that the people using these machines can focus on what they're doing and not have to constantly answer all of these questions and go through these investigations or these suggestions that we're going to move these devices somewhere else and do something else. They can focus on doing their job and doing their job well.
Yeah, that was, it's kind of a big thing of a lot of developers use this, and developers are good at developing. They don't necessarily need to be infrastructure or security experts right out of the box if you can get the right folks all together.
And having the conversations with them to explain why this is being done, and this is not being done to make their lives miserable or to slow them down. It's actually to give them the confidence to be able to move quickly and not have this, you know, overarching fear that someone is going to suggest that they're doing something that they shouldn't. So having a look at our compliance benchmarks is a really good way to think about how we're going to secure these things. So, you know, example is in CIS level 2, you know, CIS benchmarks are best practices for the secure configuration of a target system. It's a starting point to build a secure framework. So we see a lot of organisations looking at these particular guidances to give them the list of things they should be approaching. So how do we do that? So macOS Security Compliance Project, I'm guessing a lot of people here are familiar with this. So that's a group of people who have gotten together and had a look at these various security benchmarks and turned that into commonly agreed consensus on the code. So we no longer need to interpret those guidelines. We've literally got codified solutions that we can implement in our organizations. So, you know, we've picked a benchmark that we're going to use. So for example, we might pick CIS benchmark, and then that gives us the ability through the tools that have been created on that to then implement that and choose the rules that we want. So at Jamf, we've gone from the Jamf compliance editor and now actually in the GUI in compliance benchmarks, where we can actually really easily choose the controls that we want to implement and push these out to the devices. But it also gives you the ability to decide which of these controls are appropriate for these devices. So what used to be a really arduous task, thanks to the mSCP, is now a very simple thing for us to do. And what's important is understanding the difference between a benchmark and a baseline. So the benchmark is the guidance you get from NIST or CIS. And you don't have to deploy every single setting that's in there. In fact, if you do, you're probably going to have a rough time. You're going to have a rough time from the users complaining about the fact that they're having a rough time and they're not able to do what they do. So you need to go through and, as your organisation, understand what's appropriate for these machines. You need to understand which one of these we need to adhere to, because we may have regulatory governance that we need to adhere to. But you also need to have a look at the use case for the machines. You don't then create a baseline for your entire organisation. You're going to have different baselines for different end user machines, and you're going to have a different baseline for different Cloud Macs and the purposes of which they're being used for. So you may have a different one for someone who's accessing customer data. You may have a different one for someone who maybe has payment information. You may have a different baseline for something that is pushing code into production. And so this is why we need to focus on the different use cases we have for those machines and understand what's important from a compliance and security point of view. So, you know, we need to consider some of these things that we aren't going to be doing based on the differences of those Macs. So you may have your benchmark that says we have to, you know, encrypt with FileVault, but we just heard that we aren't going to be doing that. So that's something that we need to remove. Otherwise, we're going to be showing that these devices are non-compliant. Another thing we didn't speak about with the differences as well is, how does Wi-Fi work on these devices?
That is a very good point, because it doesn't. This is one of the differences. We said there's not much, but one of the differences is that the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth hardware are not something that's addressable on an EC2 Mac. So if you're doing something like grabbing an extension attribute to say what Wi-Fi network somebody's on, you very well could end up with a weird answer or less.
Yeah, and Bluetooth. I'm guessing that's something that there's not really a lot of need for on these devices as well, isn't there?
And a lot of this is really in the name of security. This is a data center of devices that are very much not, when they're in use for the person that has them and nobody else, and they absolutely can't have another bit of data go from one part to the other. So doing things like kind of keeping the radios out of, from really speaking in a place like this really does kind of give that extra layer of, okay, nobody's going to be able to kick on the Bluetooth radio and sniff around, for example.
Yeah, and so also the difference between a device that is only accessed over SSH. So you look through a lot of this guidance, and a lot of it is about the GUI and user interaction. Now, if that isn't an issue and doesn't relate to these devices, there's a whole bunch of controls that you don't need to enforce on those devices, and you're going to simplify the way that you're managing these devices. You may also be moving backwards and forwards between different versions of the operating system, so you need to make sure that the operating system is going to have different differences, and the way that you apply these baselines is going to be different depending on which version of the operating system you're using. So this is also something that's really important. As we mentioned before, these devices are being used for some very critical processes, and those processes require some secrets, and we want those secrets to stay secret, which maybe isn't going to be the case if that's on a Mac Mini underneath someone's desk, that anyone could come in and plug in a keyboard and a monitor. So it's great that we have these in the cloud where that's not really possible, but how do we manage those secrets on these devices, Dave?
Yeah, because that is, we were talking about images and all that, and that's probably sounds scary, like, oh, we're going to put a credential into an image, and that's very much, you'll see if you take a look at some of the code for the MDM enrollment, very much not something that's happening at the time. AWS has a few different means for when it comes to secrets. Specifically, AWS Systems Manager has what's called parameter store, and also AWS Secrets Manager, which actually uses the same encryption key that you would use for all of your the volumes on your EC2 Macs, and that can be used to basically encrypt this other piece of data, or even keeping those entirely separate, just so you can make sure that one device is only able to decrypt that one piece of data. It's things also like what are called IAM, or Identity Access Management Instance Profiles. This would let you give very, very granular permissions. That idea of, I want this Mac to be able to see this thing only at this time, and then that's sort of the end of it.
And having good governance around things like your developer certificate to make sure that developer certificate is only used to sign things that it should be, so you're not going to have the risk of that being compromised, and governance around how those certificates are stored and the pipeline that then adds them onto these devices. So, that goes back to that trust of, making sure that only the people that should have access to those secrets have it, and those secrets are only used on devices that are enrolled and secure and compliant. So then it's about making sure about what's happening. We've ensured that these devices are configured correctly, but that's not somewhere where we can just walk away and go, our job's done. We need to make sure we know about what's happening ongoing on these devices, that feedback loop of the device has been configured, it's been started up, but somebody has got SSH access to this machine. What did they do? What didn't they do? And how do we get surety and visibility over that? So what are some of the ways that we can do this through AWS?
So I'm going to start specifically with the AWS side, since that is something that's a bit different, where this Mac, since it's in our data center, it's flowing through our virtual private cloud. You have the ability to watch the calls that are made using something like AWS CloudWatch or CloudTrail for every single move that's made through the admin console or through CLI. So already you have a control over and basically auditability over a lot of information that's a little bit more difficult when it Mac's out in the wild. But of course, once, even after that, we've got a whole lot of telemetry from on the Jamf side with unified logging.
So in Jamf for Mac, or Jamf Protect, the idea of telemetry, and so those of us who are familiar using sort of Jamf Pro and MDM would be very familiar with inventory and recon, but that's a snapshot of a point in time. Whether you're running that daily or weekly, that's going to tell you about what's on that device now. Whereas our telemetry, which you can see below, is this constant live stream of data, very granular, very customizable data of what's going on. So, inventory can tell you which apps are installed. Telemetry can tell you when it was installed, who installed it, what processes were used, what called the installer that then did the installation, and then what other things the installer did as well. So you can look at process execution from built-in third-party software, the login history of who logged in, who authenticated, how they did, why they did that as well. And so you can leverage that data to give your organisation the confidence that these devices are only being used. We need to lock these machines down because we need to make sure that they can't be used for anything bad, and then locking them down to the point where they can't actually be used for anything good. Having telemetry means, well, we know if someone is doing something that they shouldn't be doing, and then that also gives us the power to be able to address that. It gives us the ability to know whether there's been any configuration skew. We had a control in place that was preventing this, but we can now see that that's happening. Or we have a control in place to prevent this, but we know that it's not happening because we can't see any evidence of this. And calling out again that this is in real time, this data, so you can very quickly respond if you see something that's happening that shouldn't happen. So then we get to identity. So who is using this machine and how are they using it? So depending on the use case of the machine, this is going to be very different. Are they using SSH, or are they doing a GUI login with Platform Single Sign-On or Jamf Connect, or heaven forbid, AD binding, which you can do if you choose to? You may be testing legacy solutions doing something like that. So this is probably a bigger challenge to address on these machines. If someone's going to be screen sharing into this machine, we need to ensure that we're addressing where they're accessing that from. So on the Cloud Mac, you can do that at a network layer. There's a lot of things you can use to control that. But is the device that is remoting into that compliant? Are you just letting anybody access that from their internet fridge or something like that? Or are you ensuring that there's some controls in there? We've all heard the horror stories of developers that outsource their own job and they're just sending MFA codes to a handful of developers that are outsourced to it. So how do we make sure that those sort of things aren't happening on those machines? And there's lots of tools that we can use. And so that's something you've got to think about when you're building out workflows in these devices. But we've also got these network controls as well.
Yeah, this is absolutely one place to really take a look at this. We were talking about CloudWatch and CloudTrail earlier. You have additional information to act on when it comes to, okay, we don't necessarily have to flip this switch for everybody. It can be, okay, this is our more of our unique to this part of AWS, or possibly making changes to the actual network to make that easier.
Yeah, and it gives you all sorts of opportunities for that least privileged access. Like the build server is going to require access to a very specific set of hosts for what it's doing. And we can make sure that that's all that it's got access to. So you then don't need to worry about some of the other tools that may be used to inspect and govern network. You don't need to inspect networks that the device doesn't have access to. But then there's also things like network relay that you can use that can actually give you very specific access to certain hosts and know that that is encrypted and secured. So let's put it all together now. We've thought about all of the things that we have to do. So now we get to the fun bit. So I'll let you talk through how this works.
Absolutely. So yeah, this is to take a look at what enrollment looks like on EC2 Mac. To start with, we're going to start with an EC2 Mac, of course. And I'd mentioned earlier, since we have these physical devices, it's what's called a dedicated host. So you have your dedicated host, and you start your instance, or kind of think of that as their image on top of that host. We're using the EC2 Mac, the enroll EC2 Mac script here. And that's grabbing credentials from AWS Secrets Manager, as we were talking about with that IAM instance profile, which means this instance is, the only thing it can read is the credentials that it needs at that point. And there's even a way in this script to say, once you're done with it, completely take my access away, I'll never need it again. So once it has its credentials, it's going to reach out over the VPC to the Jamf Pro server. It's basically making, well, two calls, one for authentication and the other for create computer invitation. And that goes back to the Mac as a part of the MDM profile. The XML profile is actually assembled. The UI is operated through the script itself, and communication basically kicks off from the or bidirectional communication over APNS and all that. And anytime you create you're starting up a new image, as long as you've got those things set, it's going to keep looking back to that information. And in the background, because I've always said this demo gets worse and worse over the years, this is not really a screen that you see. Oh, sorry. The actual display here is something that a user is not going to necessarily be looking at. I do have another copy of this if it isn't moving. Yeah. But yeah, this basically is happening entirely behind the scenes. I actually even included the setup process for this. So I'm not only getting this ready to get enrolled, I'm actually going to basically log out, and this is going to log back in and entirely enroll on its own.
Yeah. And so the beauty of that is that this doesn't require any user interaction. When you provision the device in the AWS console, this is all happening in the background, and then you get the notification that it's ready and can be used for what it needs to be used for. So what's the sort of the time that you should expect from the sending the command to say, we would like one of these Macs, these specs, this configuration? What should you expect to then when it's ready to start SSHing or logging into?
Average time is about 6 to 20 minutes. I obviously spend a lot of time spinning these up a lot. So yeah, in my own experience, it's usually closer on the 6 side. And yeah, it's pretty nice to be able to just say, I need a Mac, I need it to run this version of macOS, and it's done by the time I could walk around the block and back.
Yeah, and so, the MDM enrollment's a really important part of people's security and deployment. So that's why automating this is really important. So, the other thing to focus on is match the way you design these workflows to the use cases that are going to be on these machines. Don't try and create a blanket policy of everything you want to happen on these devices. Understand the different use cases and build your compliance around that. And work with the different teams, the users of the machines, but also your security and governance people to understand what you need to do, and then explain to them why maybe that may not be appropriate, and this is how we're covering that compliance in a different way that is going to be better and is going to make sense. So we've got some resources for some of the things we've spoken to here. Obviously, macOS Security Compliance Project. It's really important to support them and thank them for the work that they do. They're making our life a lot easier. But you've also got a lot of really awesome information there, haven't you, Dave?
Yeah. Although I'll still say the mSCP is still incredibly beneficial. I want to throw my own thanks onto that too. Yeah.
All right. So thank you very much. If we've got a little bit of time, I think, for some questions. We've got maybe 1 or 2 questions if anybody's got anything. Otherwise, we're happy to talk to people afterwards.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks, gentlemen. So you talked a little bit about CloudWatch and CloudTrail, and so over at our shop, we're pretty familiar with using those for troubleshooting our services. We talked about using those to take action. So I'm kind of curious if you could talk about maybe some high-level examples of an event coming into one of those services and then using that to take an action and how that would look like.
Yeah, I think you're seeing a lot of sort of that power of having that visibility is being able to not only built right into CloudWatch, you have the ability to have alarms go off and actuate just about anything else in AWS. So we've it's funny because that's an enormous question. There's a whole lot that you could actually do just knowing that what your administrators are doing and the kind of traffic that's going over the network. I would say that, yeah, there's a lot of potential of sort of like feeding into large models. I know that this is going to be me. I'm not entirely sure what the name of the AWS service is if we have that right now, but we definitely let's talk more, because I know that, yeah, when it comes to especially the AI stuff.
And this is where also using things like, I'm really excited by a shared signals framework and what that can do, where you get different tools sharing the information they've got and allowing you to make decisions based on multiple sources of data and eliminate false positives, and then evaluate that and understand, which shade of green, orange, or red it is, and decide whether we're at hit the big red button. And tools that have got APIs. So for example, you could, deprovision this machine very quickly if you think something is happening to it, and mitigate the problem straight away, and then start to look at other things. Then be able to have a look at the telemetry logs of what's happened in that machine in even greater detail to see whether anything else happened apart from the alarm that you've got. But I think that this is why we love automation, is because you can get tools talking to different tools.
Thanks.
Besides Jamf Pro, is Jamf Protect also, does Jamf Protect support EC2 Mac?
Yes, absolutely it does. So like I said, they're, apart from a few minor things, they're no different to a Mac Mini or a Mac Studio that would be sitting on a desk somewhere. So it's still running macOS. So yes, absolutely, it is supported, the tools work, but it's making sure that your configuration is true to what are being done on these devices. So yes, absolutely.
So basically all the products that we have for Jamf for Mac, everything is supported for EC2 Mac?
Yes, absolutely, but it then also comes back to the actual capabilities and functionality of those tools. Is there may be something that is not relevant to the use case, whether it be physical access because it's in Dave's server rack rather than our own. But yeah, we've got many customers using these tools on EC2 Macs.
Including CTNA?
Including CTNA, yeah, absolutely, okay. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
With the ZTNA things, it's also important to understand that it is in AWS's network. So it may be something to look at where you may already have the controls there that are achieving what you need to achieve, that you can govern where it can access based on those controls. So it's important to make decisions about what's the right tool for the job rather than here's something we already have, so therefore we have to use that. This is where the approach for Jamf for Mac has come from, is rather than thinking about, well, we've procured this tool, so therefore we have to use it. Jamf for Mac gives you access to everything Jamf has, and then you have the freedom now to choose whether that's the right solution for you. And if something else that you have in your tech stack is the right solution for you, then that's the solution we want you to use. Not feel like you have to get utilization for utilization's sake. So yeah, and I think look at what you're trying to do and work with us, and we'll help you understand whether there may be some configurations that need to be applied.
Just a quick question. How are serial numbers handled to differentiate the virtual machines?
That is a good question. Since these are actual physical Macs, they are physical Mac serial numbers. If you virtualize on top of it, it'll do the whole thing where it generates a serial number, but the actual hardware that's in our warehouse, those are the serial numbers of them, which is mainly also why ADE today is not quite a workflow, because we can't exactly say, okay, this serial number doesn't belong to Amazon for a bit. That's a good question. Thanks.
Dave, Marcus, thank you very much. I think we're out of time here, but if anybody has any questions that they want to follow up with you with, where can they find you?
I guess Mac Admin Slack is usually a great place to find us. I think you can find both of us there, or feel free to come and chat to us for the rest of the event, or follow the links for Dave that he had there. There's some really useful information there.
And say that between the two of us, I think we kind of like talking about this stuff.
Yeah, you know, I think a quick Google search of either of our names, you'll find how to get in touch with us pretty quickly.
Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you very much.